I want to start off just by saying, what an honor it is to be asked to share about my experience and the work that I'm involved with in the Colorado River Basin. I think it's an incredibly vital topic right now, and it's absolutely important to be having these conversations. And I just want to say thank you to the folks who put this conference on to allow me to have the opportunity to speak with you folks today. I got to speak with a few people already this morning, and I think it's incredible. I looked at the agenda. I looked at the folks that are part of some of the panels and the work that they do and the work that they're up to, and wow, what an incredible group of people here this morning. So I really acknowledge the work you're doing and the commitments that you have to your helping respective reservations and tribes, in the areas that you work in. I want to introduce myself. My name is Daryl Vigil, as was mentioned, and my tribal affiliation is I'm Hickory Apache by enrollment, but I'm also Zio Pueblo, and I'm also Jemez Pueblo. And so what does that mean? Pretty mixed up Indian, I guess. And I think that background has really allowed me the opportunity to really exercise, and it gives me the strength in terms of the work that I'm up to, in terms of the advocacy that I promote. A little bit about my background. I live in Dulce, New Mexico. I'm a single father of 2 teenage sons, so that means I have to leave here soon after I get through talking because I don't trust them. I'm currently my tribe's water administrator, which means that I handle my nation's water policy and water rights issues. And we are a tribe that has developed by council resolution and adopted into law. We have adopted a water code as well. And that's what holds me to account, is my nation's water code. And my tribe settled our water rights in 1992. And where we're located, I'll show you just in a minute, but we're in north central New Mexico. We have about 1 million acres of land up there, and we have 40,000 acre-feet of settled water rights and about 9,000 acre-feet of historic water rights. My background is not water. My background is hospitality. I grew up in the hotel casino business, so in another lifetime I helped open my tribe's 2 casinos on the reservation, and I also started a couple of Section 17 corporations, utility authority and the gaming enterprise. And so 8 years ago when I got into this, I had absolutely no clue or idea about some of the issues revolved around water. I had some idea in terms of our settlement and some of the work we were up to with the utility authority, but I didn't know some of the broader issues that were involved in Indian settlements and Indian water policy. And so, as I've gone through the process over the last 8 years, I really see that I truly am an accidental water guy. I didn't come to this by training, and I'm blown away by the amount of smart people that I've way smarter than I am in terms of water issues and hydrology and climate and those kind of things, and I'm very grateful for that, and that we're on the right path with academia. And I was a part of a conference in Boulder, Colorado this summer about historic human responses to historic periods of drought. And that really was, academia and college professors talking about specific eras in our past history of drought and the human response and the human reaction to those droughts. And I thought, wow, this is what a critical component to have academia be a part of this whole solution process. We're always telling our kids, about going out and getting educated and then coming back to utilize that education maybe to forward something on our respective reservations. But a lot of times, where tribal governance is, a lot of times there's not the structure or the capacity to actually have that happen. And so we end up getting jobs in the outside world rather than maybe contributing to our respective reservations. And I think that, as we move forward, that's going to be a key component. We have tribal leadership always talking about go out and get your education so you can come back and help. But sometimes there's not that structure to come back and help your reservation and to help your people. And so how is it that we start to look at bridging those capacity gaps that are in existence right now? And that's a reality. And I think traditionally, the reality of tribal policy and tribal situations in the United States right now is just the fact that, we're operating from a deficit. And when I say deficit, I mean that, we're way behind the game. And when I say we're way behind the game, you have to acknowledge some of the realities of who we are as a people. We didn't get to be citizens until the 30s. We didn't get to vote until sometime soon after that. I mean, that's just relatively recent. Some of our reservations were established very, very recently. And, a lot of the situations in terms of the creation of reservations and where we are now may not have been our initial homeland as the Hickory is. Our initial homeland was the Channel Valley, but there was a little thing in the way of us fulfilling on being in our traditional homeland that was Spanish land grants. And so all the nuances that happened with that particular era of colonialization. And so 8 years ago, when I got into this water world, if you will, I didn't know a whole lot. And I remember going to some of the first meetings that dealt with Colorado River Basin issues. And I think it's really important to set the context in terms of, what does that look like in reality? There's 40 million people in the Colorado River Basin. 7th largest economy in the world. Wow, huge, huge. And the river right now is on the verge of collapse. Absolutely it is. And what does collapse look like? Collapse looks like probably somebody in Phoenix or Los Angeles going to the spigot and nothing coming out. And so how do we start to address those? Yes, we've been in a reaction for quite a while in terms of what's going on currently. And there's a lot of drought contingency planning going on right now, a lot of conversation about how we move forward in the immediate future, but not too much at all in terms of, what do we do in the next 100 years? What does that look like for us? What does sustainability look like? What does balance look like, given that we live now in a world that has 8 billion people? And in the midst of all this, how is it that what role do tribes play? How do tribes fit in? And I laugh about that because, there's the saying about the elephant in the living room, but when I first got involved in Colorado River issues, it was the Indian in the conference room. You would go there and it's like, well, what do we do with these guys? They have some water rights, but, we don't want to acknowledge those water rights to a large extent because we're using them. We don't have to pay for them right now. We don't have to give any kind of credit for it. And so right now, and I'll speak more to this as I go through my presentation, there's close to 500,000 acre-feet of unused tribal settled water rights in the Colorado River Basin. And the majority goes to Southern California, Central Arizona Project, and get no credit for that. Can you imagine another stakeholder in today's times that would let 500,000 acre-feet of water go down the river without not being acknowledged for it or compensated for it? It wouldn't work. And I think, one of the things that comes to my mind right now, too, is something that Mike Connor, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Interior and the former Reclamation Commissioner, was asked last year at the Colorado River Symposium. He was asked, why should tribes be involved in this whole process? And he had one word, and that word was equity. It's the right thing to do. It's the morally right thing to do, given, the absolute reality of our past. And so, I think, you know, that's the basis of where I operate from. You know, what is it that, you know, I can personally do, you know, to start the process of having tribes involved in this dialogue, and the absolute value of tribal contribution, and to have that tribal contribution acknowledged. And what does acknowledgement even look like? So I'm going to go into, you know, the presentation, and this is the story of the 10 Tribes Partnership. It's not done yet, we're just starting, so we're going to go forward with this. I'm also working, I was the chairman of the 10 Tribes Partnership for a couple of years. It's an ad hoc organization. I'll talk a little more about that as we move on, but I'm also involved with something called Water and Tribes Project. And it really is an effort between myself and Dr. Matt McKinney from the University of Montana to really do outreach to the other 29, to all the 29 tribes in the Colorado River Basin. Why? You know, to build advocacy, to build consensus, to find out, you know, what each tribe values in terms of their water rights or their unsettled water rights, you know, what they're doing, what projects they're up to, and so that, you know, as we move forward and the successes that we've had with the 10 Tribes Partnership, that we can broaden that conversation. And that's something that we're really looking to do, is, you know, continually to broaden that conversation, you know, to anybody that'll listen, really. And you'll see, you know, how that plays into our vision and our mission statement. So to start off with, I want to show you and create some relatedness about, you know, okay, sorry about that, technical difficulties. So this is the Navajo River, and it flows from Colorado into New Mexico, and this is at the northern boundary of my reservation, and it flows into the Navajo Dam. And I don't know how many of you have been to Dulce, but if you Google Dulce, you'll find that we're the capital for the spaceship base and aliens. And so, Dulce Rock. For those of you who have never been to Dulce, that's a Dulce Rock. And my tribe has its annual feast on September 15th of each year, and it's a race between the White Clan and the Red Clans of our tribe, and it's an encampment at Stone Lake, and every year the race is a gathering to bring the tribe together, but also, you know, to celebrate our creation story and where we emerged from. And part of the celebration in our feast is to emulate. We have a relay race that emulates our creation story about a race around the world that the birds had. And so we get painted up as birds. And the feast is not only a celebration of our emergence and who we are as a people, but it also, you know, talks a lot about balance. You know, and the last 11 years or so, the Red Clan won, which means that there would be lack of moisture. And so this year, White Clan finally won. So it's been raining and snowing in our area. So I think there's a lot to be said for that spirituality. I don't know who that guy is. Earlier this summer, I had a huge opportunity to go on a river trip from Moab to Lake Powell. And, you know, I'm predominantly Pueblo and by blood. And being there, you know, I spent 5 days on that river. And you see the river, this picture doesn't do it justice, but it's really the color of a river is supposed to be. It's brown, it's gritty, you know, and if you guys see pictures of the Grand Canyon, water in the Grand Canyon is green. And why is it green? Because of Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Mead, and you know, because we've interrupted the historic flow of the river. And it's really interesting, and this is a side note about this crazy, dumb information that you get sometimes, but a lot of the river guides in the Grand Canyon who operate boats, you know, often get this fungus that's not anywhere else except in the Grand Canyon. And so another impact of what's going on. But this trip, you know, absolutely touched me and moved me and it changed me. And because, you know, yeah, I've been doing this work for 8 years, but I really got, you know, the connection that I have and that we have for the most part, from what I understand when I talk to a lot of you natives out there about, you know, the absolute connection that we have to land and water. And that's at the heart of who we are. And during that trip, you know, I got to see things like this, and it's like, well, what is that? I didn't know what it was. And so I went to, when I got home, my Uncle Felix is a medicine man from Jemez Pueblo, and I showed it to him, and he was like, instantly identified that that's one of the Kachinas in that pueblo. And I was blown away by that. These are thousands of years old, and this still exists today. And so, that really made me strengthen my resolve in terms of like, wow, you know, we've been here, and I think we play a unique role, and we have a unique ability, you know, to bring people together, because we operate from a different context. And these handprints, you know, I was moved because, you know, my hand fit right into one of those, and I was like, wow. And I showed my uncle this picture too, and I was like, I wonder how they did that. And he's like, well, they used reeds, because that's what we use. And I was blown away again, because here we are, you know, this grand experiment of Native Americans that has been going on for the last at least 15,000 years that we can prove, you know, versus the current experiment of America, which is around 200 years. You know, that worked for thousands of years, and it continues to work to a large extent. And so I really wanted to share those with you because I really wanted to provide the context of, you know, my evolution in terms of where this is going for me, because I'm not too different as a human being than most people, you know, in terms of, you know, the things that I've learned and the structures that I was grown up with and those kind of things. And so going on this trip, you know, I knew that this was something worth fighting for. This is worth something saving, you know, and I've heard tribal leadership and tribal elders talk about the fact that this river is sick and that it needs to be brought back to life. And for us, you know, being the lifeblood, you know, of who we are and what we think of water, you know, makes it even that more imperative that we get into action. And earlier in the year, I had the opportunity to take a trip of the lower basin of the Colorado River, which is basically from Lake Mead down, where I got to visit Fort Mojave and Colorado River Indian tribes and Kishan and Kokopah. And at the end of that of that particular stretch of river is a dam called Morales Dam. I don't know if any of you have ever been to there, but the Colorado River flows, and all of a sudden it gets diverted, the American diversion, and all that's left, if you look out over Morales Dam, you know, to the south, all that's left of the Colorado River there is a 3-foot swath of river. It's gone. There is no more river. And I stood there, and you know, I wept because, wow, you know, this is what we've done to this river. And I don't know if any of you know about the pulse flow that happened in 2014. It was an effort of major stakeholders in the Colorado River Basin to actually have water flow all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, Sea of Cortez, right? Yeah. And to get water back to the Delta. And I saw footage of that because there's natives on the other side of the border too. And those people had never seen the river with water in it. And so communities came out, you know, to be there when the water was going to be there. And it brought life back into the community and excitement because the river was alive again. And so, and I'll share this right now because I think it's important to share right now, but I think, you know, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but one of the things we did at 10 Tribes Partnership was, you know, to create some relatedness, we did a video. We did 3 videos actually, and one of them was, the first one was to create relatedness with tribes. And we show a Kokopah elder talking about how their life was given by the river. They were river people, and they were sustained by the river. And so the camera pans out, and there's no river. And so if there's no river, and there are river people, and their life is given by the river, then what have they become? Who are they? And isn't that, in essence, you know, genocide? You take away people's identity and ability to be who they are. And so that's the seriousness of this today. And so if you hear me laughing, it's not because this subject matter isn't serious. It's just because I like to laugh, and I think natives like to laugh. So the Colorado River 10 Tribes Partnership, also known as just the 10 Tribes Partnership. You know, it was formed in 1992, and it was basically formed by the 10 tribes who had settled to a large extent their water rights in the Colorado River Basin. And those 10 tribes are Hickory, Southern Ute Mountain, Navajo, the Ute Tribe, Fort Mojave, Chemehuevi, Colorado River Indian Tribes, Kishon, and Kokopah. And cumulatively, the 10 tribes have 2.4 million acre-feet of water rights in the Colorado River, 20% of the volume of the Colorado River, and never had traditional access to any kind of policy table or any kind of management tables. You know, we've been a reaction to what other people, you know, have decided, you know, the role that we need to play. And so the leadership at that time was pretty insightful, I think visionary, given that they saw that there was going to be the need for this organization. And so they put it together, and they thought the best way to organize this was to be ad hoc, that they would get together with meetings, the 10 tribes, and each one would pay their own way to attend the meeting. And again, the reason was to really keep up to speed and up to date on the issues and the policy and the management of the Colorado River and any of the issues that might arise out of that. And in 1996, the 10 Tribes Partnership actually joined the Colorado River Users Association. And the Colorado River Users Association, if you're not aware of it, is one of the larger water organizations in the Southwest. You know, 800, 900,000 members, depending on the year. And it really is the forum every year in Las Vegas, you know, to get together with, you know, the larger group of stakeholders to discuss issues. And so we joined that organization in 1996. Tribal seals of the 10 tribes that are involved with this. And we work very closely with, and I'll get to working on tribal water study, and so that's why I have Reclamation and Department of Interior logos up there as well. So this is the Colorado River Basin, and it shows the position of each tribe where they're located. There's 5 in the upper basin, 5 lower basin, and Navajo sits in both. And like I said, absolutely geographically diverse, you know, to a large extent, a lot of it arid, for the most part arid. And I think that one of the things that, that I talk about a lot is that there's 567 federally recognized tribes, each distinct sovereign entities. And so when you talk about a tribe, I think a lot of times the general public doesn't have an understanding of that unique kind of situation, that they're unique sovereign entities, and that we're not an ethnic group. And that if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. And some of the fixes that we have in terms of policy and those things as they pertain to Native Americans and tribes, really address us as a broad group. But when you consider that we're 567 federally recognized tribes, each distinct entities, and each individual in terms of the geographics, the culture, the language, each one different. It's really, really difficult to start talking about, like, how is it that you start to address some of those needs that tribes have given that situation? And given, when you talk about water settlements, that each one is different. Each one has its own unique provisions and nuances and those kind of things, quantifications. And so it makes it even more difficult. So, we spent a lot of time talking about what we wanted to do. And I think this is really, really important, because one of the things that I've seen in my own experience about tribal organizations is creating the context from which they operate from and continuing to operate from that context. And so when I was chair of the organization in 2012, 2013, one of the things that I thought that was really, really important was to create consensus about who we are and where we operate from and where we're headed. And it's something that I thought that if we don't have that, then we're gonna be reactionary, we're gonna be emotional, and we're gonna lose out on opportunities. And it sounds like pretty familiar in terms of what usually happens in Indian country. And so I thought, well, we need to create a vision statement. And this, took about 6 months along with the mission statement, but I think it's really, really important. And it's something that we read at every partnership meeting. And I think this is something that drives us. And so I just want to read it because it's very powerful to me, and it always will be. Water is life. Water, the giver, the sustainer of life. Water is a sacred and spiritual element to the tribes of the partnership. The Creator instilled in the first peoples the responsibility of protecting the delicate, beautiful balance of Mother Earth for the benefit of all living creatures. The partnership will embrace and own the stewardship of the Colorado River and lead from a spiritual mandate to ensure that this sacred water will always be protected and be available and sufficient for each tribe's homeland. And, when you look at that, lead from a spiritual mandate, that's a pretty powerful concept. How do you argue with that? I'm guided by this. And I think, we really needed this, and I think sometimes, when we're operating, we're moving forward, we want to be part of policy groups and those kind of things, but we forget our focus, because as you guys well know, there's this thing, the water world and the land world can instantly go to all sorts of different places, and if you're not focused on what it is that, who you are and what you want, then you easily get lost. And so we talked about this too. How are we going to accomplish that vision? We wanted something that's going to be really, really easy, for us to execute in our minds anyway. That's not too complicated. And so at the heart of our mission statement is to consult, collaborate, coordinate, and educate. I think one of the biggest things that I saw is an absolute ignorance of tribes, tribal sovereignty, and in the basin, and just in my general experience. So how is it that we start to, forge And we're going to talk about consulting, collaborating, coordinating, and building partnerships with people and executing, new communication processes and those kind of things. Then we better probably first start to look at how, we relate to people. And what is it that, that we can do to create that relatedness of who we are as tribes and tribal people. And it really is creating that relatedness. This is what our reservations look like. This is what our governance looks like. This is our challenges and our barriers that we experience on our reservations right now. And inevitably, I got to had the pleasure of talking in Moab at the River Network conference a couple weeks ago, and I got to meet a whole lot of young people like the ones sitting and at this conference, and there weren't tribal people there, but there were humans there. And when I explained to them, what was going on with the 10 Tribes Partnership and some of the issues with the Colorado River, they got it. I mean, I wasn't blaming them. I wasn't beating up on the federal government. I was just laying the case of what was going on and speaking frankly and hopefully truthfully about my experience of that. And so what did that do? I think I left there, having created some partnerships, some friendships, and some pathways to something being different that didn't exist before. And that's the real opportunity, I think, that that I have to be able to do this work, is to be able to bridge those gaps that didn't exist before. So, Colorado River Basin Water Supply Demand Study. In 2009, the Bureau of Reclamation engaged in a partnership with the 7 basin states to engage in a supply-demand study of the Colorado River Basin. And it really was supposed to be, it was not intended, they kept saying that over and over again, I'm not sure why, that this was not going to be a policy document. And so they engaged in that process. The 7 basin states ponied up their share of the cost of this study along with reclamation. And what happened was, go back to that 20% of the volume of the Colorado River and 2.4 million acre feet. They conveniently left us out of that conversation. This is going to be a supply-demand study for the next 50 years at the time. And they left us out. And so what did we do? We do what we know how to do. We got mad. And it was actually a really good thing for us because, it really energized our organization. At that particular point in time, it was falling apart. Maybe some of you guys know some Indian organizations that just don't have any real integrity, and they meet just to meet. That's kind of where we were headed. And so we beat up on reclamation and Department of Interior, and sometimes that's fun. But that's kind of the model of, in my opinion, again, of tribal leadership, because there's this mechanism where you get in a room with, the federal government or state government, and, it's a contentious environment automatically, and, we browbeat them about, what they're doing and what they're not doing and how unconscionable it is, and the federal government sits there, they listen, and then when you leave there, nothing happens. Each side thinks that they did what they were supposed to do, and very passionately most of the time, right? And so that's what happened with us. We yelled a lot, but then we also used it as an opportunity. It's like, okay, what can we do with this exclusion? And so we fought really, really hard to get some disclaimer language. And that disclaimer language basically said that the broader study did not adequately capture tribal water in the basin. And that there probably needed to be an additional study of tribal water specifically in the basin. And this is really huge because right now, as you know, there's a deficit, or maybe you don't know, but of 1 million acre feet already between supply and demand in the Colorado River. 1 million acre feet. And that's anticipated, according to the study, to increase to 3 million acre-feet by 2060. And so what's going to happen, Phoenix, Las Vegas, if there's a collapse of the system? And so we got that language approved, and it really set off the process for, I think, what we like to think of as kind of a new era in terms of how we started to deal with the federal government, and it started the whole conversation about a separate tribal water study. And so as soon as we started working on this disclaimer language, we really saw that there was a need to really fulfill on our mission to start creating those partnerships and those collaborations with other stakeholders, non-tribal stakeholders. And so one of the things that we did is that Assistant Secretary Ann Castle, Water and Science Assistant Secretary, and then Mike Connor, who was Reclamation Commissioner at the time, we spent a lot of time talking to them about what it is that we were up to, what we wanted, and how we wanted to proceed with that. And one of the things that we shared with them is just an acknowledgement of the quantifications of our water rights and each tribe's story. Because again, each tribe has a unique, distinct story about who they are and their resources. And so this was the agreement that came out of that. And I think, some of the whereases where it talks about it's really small on the screen right there. Where it talks about that it's absolutely vital that the tribe's water rights be acknowledged and be studied in a way that we can start to actually making responsible choices on how tribes fit into this whole scenario. So Ann Castle, she's not the assistant secretary anymore. She's a fellow at University of Colorado Boulder and still my really, really good friend. So, what is the tribal water study about? It really is, again, to tell each tribe's story. To assess the current water development of the tribes of the partnership. And that's the crazy thing about it. And like I said earlier, there's about 500,000 acre-feet of unused tribal water. And how does that work? Like for the tribes in the upper basin, they have the hugest quantity of that unused water. It's close to 300,000 acre-feet. And like my tribe, we have the ability to do some leasing as part of our settlement, but it's kind of a gray area about where it is that we can and can't lease water. The state of New Mexico says we can't lease it outside of state boundaries. And although we've proven to them through a couple of auctions my tribe has in 2012, 2013, that there is no market for leased water in the state of New Mexico right now. And who would have guessed? You would think, well, New Mexico's pretty dry. And so looking at those different kinds of abilities, and so our settlement was really derived for economic purposes, and we were not able to move water where it needs to go so we can get the benefit of the economic benefit of our ability to lease. And so where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us in the place of, well, why can't we do that? Well, because of the law of the river. The law of the river was created in 1922, the Colorado River Compact. And again, before we were citizens, before there was any thought at all about settlements. And so you start to take a look at, you have the Colorado River Compact, you have upper Colorado River agreements, you have Arizona v. California, you have state water law, and then you have municipal water law, regional water law, you have watershed water law. And so you start to pile up all the regulatory and policy levels of policy, and then on top of that, you put tribes. And then you try to figure out how to fit them in. And so right now, what has basically happened with the Colorado River Compact and the law of the river is that everybody has gotten really, really good at figuring out how to get around the law. And the question is, why don't we just talk about looking at how we can amend the law? And the instant response is, no, you can't do that. Well, why not? And I still have not gotten a good answer to why you can't change law. I mean, if the current structure is not working, and I like to say this, it's that your best thinking got us into this situation. And so we're supposed to trust that you're going to come up with a solution? Really? And so it needs to be, in my opinion, and a lot of other people that I'm working with, it absolutely has to be an integrated process that has to take into consideration, our ability to look at current law and look at legislative fixes, and we don't want to go down the road, but litigious fixes as well. And so reclamation in a very, very budget short kind of environment came up with the money to help us do this. And it gave us a huge opportunity first to tell each tribe's story and all our challenges and the barriers that we've had traditionally in being able to develop our water rights. And that's really at the heart of this, our ability to be self-determined in our ability to develop our water rights. Isn't that a component of sovereignty? It was interesting, last week I was at the Water Law Conference in Phoenix, and a tribal leader from Laguna Pueblo was talking about, there's this word sovereignty, but we don't have he was talking about his Pueblo. We don't have a word for sovereignty in the Carrisan language, is what he was saying. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because a lot of the policy and the law is premised on tribes not being involved in this whole process and utilizing language and those kind of things that maybe we're not too familiar with. And so part of this whole process really was not only to educate the broader outside world about specifics about tribal water issues as it relates to the 10 Tribes Partnership, but really to be able to use these documents to take these back to our respective reservations, to share them with our leadership and the community so that they would understand as well. Because I think that's a huge, huge thing, and I'll talk a whole lot more about that later, is that capacity gap right now that exists with tribal leadership and the leadership that exists outside of tribal boundaries, tribal reservation boundaries. And how is it that we start to bridge that gap so tribal leadership can then make responsible decisions for their membership? And I don't know, you have to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of the reservations that I've been to, the leadership that gets elected because they have huge families, or they don't want to disrupt the status quo. And so there's this big kind of surprise, when new leadership gets in, and there's nothing changes, because the basic foundation from which we operate from in terms of governance, sometimes it's that stuff that we got from the Indian Reorg Act as a kind of a template constitutional governments that we still operate from, that don't fit the needs of today for most tribes. But we try to make them fit because that's what we think we're supposed to do, or that's all we've known how to do. And I think, a lot of this conversation about sovereignty, I like to share with tribes, is like, you have a huge opportunity, in terms of creating who you want to be into the future. But understanding that we live in a broader world today, it's changed. I mean, we're probably not going to hunt buffalo anymore. Just not going to happen. And so, what does that look like today? What does being Native in 2018 look like, really? And not trying to hold on to some romanticized idea of who we are, because that doesn't forward anything. And obviously, you know, we really think that by continuing to share who we are and create that relatedness, maybe there's an opening to actually start to understand and acknowledge and accept, you know, the atrocities that happen to Native Americans. And what would that do? You know, I think that we all need some closure. You know, and you know, not only would it give maybe, you know, the non-tribal world some closure, but it would absolutely give us some closure in terms of how we move forward. Because there's so many tribes that are just stuck. You know, they're not moving forward. And I know on my own reservation, you know, we're at the highest of the bad lists. You know? Highest dropout rate, highest teenage pregnancy rate, highest suicide rate. The state's coming in, they want to maybe take over our school because it's not being operated properly. You know, we're spending money. I mean, it's kind of consistent across Indian country in terms of, you know, where we're headed. And my message is like, we don't have to head down that way. We absolutely have the ability to create who we are into the future. Yeah, it's absolutely steeped in the ability to know where you came from too, and to bridge that capacity gap. And so how do we do that? Sitting with some young ladies in the back there, educated. Wow, that's really cool. And when I say that, I mean that seriously because, you know, they're talking about hydrology. You know, what a cool conversation that would be at their dinner table with their kids, right? Probably a whole lot different than ones that happen at some other tables on the reservation. You know, and so how is it that, you know, we start to create those communities that we want to see on our reservations? At the heart of it lies, you know, the acknowledgement of who we are. And it's not going to just happen by somebody acknowledging it because I say so. We have to create that perception of value to the outside world. And how is it that we do that? You know, again, we have to say what it is that we want. You know, what do we want as tribes? You know, and it was funny going through that whole process of the basin water study and then us arguing with the feds or beating up on the feds. Tribal leadership almost universally talked about, well, your trust responsibility. You have a trust responsibility. And I got it because we have an expectation of what tribes have an expectation of what trust responsibility is, but it never really gets articulated. And the disconnect is like Reclamation has a written policy of their trust responsibility to tribes. So if you read that, it's absolutely inconsistent with tribal expectation of what that trust responsibility is supposed to look like. And so, you know, you have a complete divide because you have a total misunderstanding of what trust responsibility is supposed to look like. And so sitting down and having those discussions and saying, this is what we think trust responsibility means. This is what we think sovereignty means. And why are we telling you this? Because this is what we want to do with our water. And why do we want to do this with our water? Because it's our water. And that's what we want to do with it. And that's kind of at the heart of tribal water rights right now, is an ability to be self-determined about what you want to do with your own resource. And explaining the differences of the nuances between state apportionments and that use or lose, you know, kind of notion that operates at the state level, that tribal settlements are not structured that way. Future reserved water rights. And so, and so this is a continual process of education, and we've just started this process, and we're making a lot of inroads. But you see that they call them water buffaloes, those traditional non-tribal people who run most of the waterworks in the West. And so a lot of those water buffaloes are changing. And I was very, very, my heart was really open last a couple weeks ago because, you know, there's lots of young people that are very compassionate. And I'd like to talk a little bit about DAPL too. You know, I absolutely honor and respect the effort that went into, all those folks, tribal folks, especially young tribal folks, who saw an opportunity and they were engaged and they were compassionate. And that's really, really good. And I think that we have a lot of youth on our reservations who are excited and who are compassionate, and they want to see things change on their reservation. And I think, the disconnect there was, maybe a lot of the DAPL activity with the pipeline could have been circumvented, ahead of time if there would have been tribal capacity. And at the permitting level and those kind of things. And the other thing is that, as tribes, although there's 567 federally recognized tribes, like in the Colorado River Basin, there's 40 million people there. Tribal population in the basin is about 1% of that. So you have 20% of the volume of the river, yet you're less than 1% of the total population of the Colorado River. So what does that do? That means that we don't have a whole lot of political capital or political will. We don't have the voter base. And so how is it that we start to build advocacy to actually accomplish those things that we think are just the right things to do? And those things that, we think that are basic human rights in terms of being sovereign. And so that's where you get into how do you build advocacy and partnerships. So the study really was to capture all the nuances of the 10 tribes that are part of the partnership, to look at their water rights, how they're currently using them, and start to look at the other development scenarios, fast, static, and slow, and the impact that would have on the broader basin. And what's really interesting is that we've been in this process for 5 years of the tribal water study, and we got really hung up because of the change in administration and the fact that we had to wait to find out who a new commissioner was and all those kind of things. So we're 5 years into this tribal water study. And so some of the things that have really changed recently, but we're still trying to keep up. So, again, why are we doing this? We looked at the opportunities that we saw. We know the challenges, we know the barriers, and we lined them all out. We spent, like I said, the last 5 years looking at this information. And then we looked at, why is it important for people to acknowledge tribal water rights, and maybe that tribes should be more self-determined in their ability to use their water rights? Well, because, it creates certainty in the basin. Right now, there is no excess water given that imbalance that already exists. And we know for a fact that because of the lack of understanding of tribal settlements and tribal water rights, that absolutely tribal water will be a target, and is a target. And like I said, already 500,000 acre-feet is being used by somebody that's not tribal, Metropolitan Water District of California, for instance. And so how is it that, we start to create those opportunities so that it benefits the broader basin? That's the whole thing about what we're offering up, is that if we have the ability to be self-determined, we have the ability to market interstate, we get to water bank, we get to engage in forbearance agreements, we get to look at how we start to associate some of maybe that marketing effort to actually pay for infrastructure. And that's a huge one, for tribes. You can have lots of water, but if you don't have any way to actually put it to use and build that infrastructure, then what is it for? It really is intended, to be utilized, and a tribe should be able to make that decision on its own about how it wants to use that water. So we looked at, how we find some funding for infrastructure projects and rehab of infrastructure projects, storage projects, improve efficiencies and reuse, additional stream gauging, just to make sure, because we tried to bring up the issue of coloring tribal water to find out exactly who's using that unused tribal water. There's an absolute resistance to identifying who's using that unused tribal water. We know who it is, for the most part, but there's a resistance. I'm like, why is there a resistance? You know, it's our water, we just want to know who's using it. Maybe we can go visit them and take a bath there or something. And then, you know, access to Colorado River policy tables. You know, I was at Central Arizona Project, huge project. 40% of that water that goes through the CAP canals, if you guys have seen them, pretty amazing. They're open canals. And how much water evaporates from there? They actually have calculated that. But I was at CAP's 50th anniversary. I was the only tribal person there. Pretty amazing in these days and times. You know, 40% of that water in the project is tribal water, and there's one tribal member there. And they had Governor Lewis as part of the video, and he did a really good job. And Gila River has done some amazing things with their collaborative process down in Phoenix. But all the board members at Central Arizona Project, none of them mentioned tribes. Amazing. Today, in Arizona, no mention. Board of Directors, Central Arizona Project. And so, I stopped there because where we're at right now is we met with the commissioner of not the commissioner, the lower regional manager for reclamation, and he was at our 10 tribes meeting last week. And they gave us assurances that the tribal water study would be complete by December. And so that's going to be the next step in terms of us rolling it out at the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting and really setting the plan for the next steps of the 10 tribes partnerships, which we've been planning for, which is taking the show on the road in terms of state government, our congressional delegations, and taking this show wherever we can talk about, you know, the tribal water study. And that's really important to us because, again, it sets the stage for everybody else. And then it really looks at, you know, the opening and the possibility of not only utilizing this information to create a greater awareness and understanding of tribal water in the basin, but it really opens it up, you know, for us to share with other tribes in other basins, you know, in terms of, you know, maybe issues that they're dealing with and that we've dealt with, or maybe they have something that might be able to help us. And that's one of the pathways that we've looked at in terms of that communicate, collaborate, and consult, is that we really saw an opportunity with NGOs and conservation groups. You know, sometimes that hasn't been a very good fit for tribes in the past because I think there's been a lack of trust because tribes, you know, think that somebody's going to want to create an agenda about what they think about the environment and the sustainability of the environment, but not necessarily so. And so last year we had a convening in Vegas of NGOs and conservation groups where we just sat and we just talked about, you know, how we can work together. And at the heart of this other project that I'm up to, that really is the spirit of that other project as well, is to bring not only tribal leadership and stakeholders to the table, but to bring non-tribal experts in the field as well, and to have some really frank discussions about, you know, what the outside world really thinks about us, and what are real reasonable pathways and realistic pathways for tribes to have access to some of these policy tables. And because, again, you know, living inside of a vacuum of just tribes themselves, sometimes, you know, we end up at the same place too. So it's, you know, how is it that we can move things in the basin that haven't been moved before? I think the answer lies in our ability to forge those partnerships and those relationships with the broader outside tribal world. And once we create that advocacy and and create the reason and actually be able to articulate what it is that we want as tribes, because we fight so hard to have a voice and to be at the table, but sometimes when we get there, we don't really know what we want. What's the ask? What is the ask? And so as we move forward, we're going to continue that process with the rollout of the tribal water study, but also the broader conversation of the rest of the 19 tribes in the basin. So we've reached out to Intertribal Council of Arizona, the Apache Alliance, Southern California Chairman's Association, and so that we can all hopefully start to be in the same conversation about how we start to help to build tribal capacity, which in turn will hopefully end up helping us be at those policy tables and to be represented responsibly. Because I think it's important that we're there, but if we're there and we're just listening and we're not contributing, I don't think that that's going to make us as effective as we need to be. And so I think there's a huge opportunity as tribes move forward to really be at the forefront. But in order to be at the forefront, again, you got to know what the ask is. You've got to have been grounded in building that capacity and forging those relationships and partnerships so that, when it comes down to creating that advocacy, then it's there for you. And I think, one of these things with the working group that we've established is that we have attorneys, we have watershed groups, we have tribal groups, we have municipalities. We've included a whole bunch of people in this 12-member working group that I'm working with to really just brainstorm about tribal issues and why tribes should be involved in policy. And the beautiful thing about that particular process is that if you engage in a conversation and you're open-minded about it, you don't have an expectation about what the outcome's going to be, something pretty amazing is going to be created out of that collaboration. Something that we didn't know that was going to exist before. Some pathway that we didn't know. But if we continue, as tribes, in my opinion, again, to not build that capacity and not be able to articulate what it is that we want. And that's why it's so important that we're building through education process, and it has to be linked. Everything is tied together. And we absolutely know that, in terms of you can't just segregate one component out in terms of, well, we're just going to deal with water rights. Well, no, there's the land component. There's all the social issues that are absolutely tied to our ability to, develop our water sources and our natural resources in our land. And how is that tied to, what is happening on our reservations? It's absolutely all connected. And until, I think, and tribes just haven't, I haven't seen it, or our experiences to a large degree haven't done, a very good job of building consensus broadly, because there's 567 of us, and how is it that you get those people all in one room? It's my goal. And then you have, organizations like NCAI, and I'm not gonna, dog on NCAI right now, but I just, sometimes, tribal organizations get bureaucratized just like anything else, and they become ineffective. And so they become places to go to, to go meet old friends, or to go to the casino, or whatever it may be. And you guys know there's tons of tribal conferences that happen all across the nation. There's probably hundreds going on right now as we speak, and somewhere talking about some tribal issue. And how are we using those conferences? What's being, what's happening at those conferences? What are you taking back from that you can actually contribute and use on your reservation? And so I think, there's a lot of work to be done, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you, my thoughts on this, because, when I first got into this whole realm of things, I like to use the analogy of that movie Big with Tom Hanks, and I don't know, hopefully most of you have seen this, you understand the analogy, but it's like, when I first got here, and 8 years ago, I was like, I don't get it. I just didn't get it. And what I didn't get was like, so we have almost collectively with all the tribes in the basin, 3 million acre-feet of water, and we're not on any policy table? It doesn't, and in 2010, that's when that happened, I just could not, it was unconscionable. And that's where we were at. And where else in the tribal world, where else are we like that? Where else do we need to build capacity so that we can actually have some responsible representation for our memberships? And the cool thing about this is that, if tribes build that capacity and they determine who they are, and they determine a plan of how they're going to execute those things, invariably, it always has a positive impact on the communities and the outside world off the reservation. And so I think, I challenge all of you who are tribal here today, and those who aren't, to engage in dialogues about, how realistically can we forward these, situations, and how is it that we can start to build common advocacy, because I think we all want the same thing. And so, which is certainty and sustainability of the river, in this case the Colorado River Basin. And so I think as we move forward, my message is, on the road, we're in dire shape in my reservation, and in terms of our social issues and some of our governance issues, and talk to membership all the time, one-on-one about just listening to hear what they have to say. And invariably they ask me this question. They ask, well, Daryl, how do we change this? How is it that we change this? How is it we change this level of because they're concerned, but there's not structures that are in place right now, because we operate on one of those 1934 constitutions that absolutely is outdated and doesn't fit us right now. And so we try to keep on trudging, and we're trying to fit who we are today into that who we were in the past. And it just doesn't work. And so I told this tribal person, well, what I know is this, how do you affect change? You affect change one conversation at a time. And so I'm really, really fortunate today that, I've had to have this conversation with all of you today, because that's where it really starts. And it's as simple as that. I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a PE, but I do care about the basin, I do care about the river, I do care about my tribe, and I do care about my family. And I want them to be able to have what I had when I was growing up, except the outhouse. It was cold in the winter. and to create that future for themselves. And I think and I don't want to get too pontificate too much, but I think we're at a critical stage of who we are as a nation as well. And the divisiveness and those things that happen in our everyday lives in the broader country, and those issues that we face, we're at a critical time. And I think that the ability to start to talk about what's of value to us is going to be vital in how we move forward. And tribes absolutely need to be situated to do that, because the threats, potential threats to our life, as we know it today, although sometimes it's not as great as it should be, is absolutely contingent in our ability to continue to forward and build those partnerships. Because if we continue on this path without something changing or shifting dramatically, words, those words of extermination and those kind of things start to look like they become a reality. And we've learned so well in terms of maybe some of the negative systems of bureaucracy and entitlement and being wards and having an expectation somebody's supposed to take care of us, that we don't see that responsibility and accountability are empowering concepts, and that our ability to present to the outside world and not stereotypically of who we are as people, and the absolute value that a recognition of who we are as we move forward in time absolutely has the ability to bring this nation back together. Is that lofty? Yeah, it's way lofty. But at the same time, like, who else is going to talk this? Who else is going to start to have these conversations about how we move forward? And so these conversations start to have particular relevance when you start to tie them into the specific work that most of you do. Because it absolutely, if we don't start to have a parallel movement with those technical legal people and the people that are on the ground actually managing and monitoring these resources, then, you know, it makes it hard to do work on the policy side. So I absolutely acknowledge all of you for the work that you do.
Daryl, are you willing to take questions?
And so as we move forward, you know, I think that, you know, given just the numbers, you know, how is it, you know, that we start to build capacity on reservations, and what does that even look like? You know, I asked my tribe that same thing. You know, 100 years from now, what does this reservation look like? What do the people look like? What will they be doing? How will they be doing it? Who will be leading them? And so I think that the whole idea and the notion of sovereignty and how we exercise that becomes a critical issue. And where do we have those conversations? They happen here. And I think, you know, the young people, I used to be a young person. God, when was that? One time ago. Absolutely, I think are on fire to some degree, you know, to have a pathway to do something different. And how is it that, you know, we in this room can help to shepherd and to channel, you know, that enthusiasm and that energy and that passion that young people have in terms of protecting what we have.
Questions here that came up?
Sure. Do the Colorado River tribes have senior rights, senior water rights on the Colorado River? Absolutely. They're the most senior rights, and they're tied to the seminal water rights cases for tribes, which is Winters and Winans. And so, if there is a call on the river, you know, junior regions like Central Arizona Project absolutely would be impacted the most. And so we're saying, you know, if we have 20% of the volume of the river, and there's some of the most senior rights in the basin, again, why aren't we at the policy table? Oh, because the Colorado River Compact says that it doesn't apply to tribes. But when you go to the settlements or the decrees, they say that we have to abide by the Colorado River Compact, even though we're excluded from the compact. So it's that kind of, you know, it's not consistent in terms of its application. How do you translate the tribal water standard to people who live and need the water, such as elders? That's a great question. Like, how is it that you actually get it to the people who actually need it on the reservation? And I think, you know, Navajo is a huge example of that with Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project. And to give you an example, you know, if you guys aren't aware of it, in 2006, Obama passed legislation, you know, to approve the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project and their settlement. And what it does is that it provides water to an estimated 80,000 Navajos who still haul water on a daily basis. This is in America today. So if you go to the Navajo res, you know, you see all these trucks with big old water tanks on the back. And so in Farmington and Gallup and wherever, Shiprock, And so, you know, and it's being contested by the San Juan County Water Association, San Juan County Water Commission, yeah. And they've been fighting this settlement, which will provide 80,000 people who don't have a sustainable, reliable source of water. So I think, you know, at the heart of this is, you know, again, how is it that we can actually put these, even on our own reservations, how can we put these water rights to use? Because sometimes there's not an opportunity because of cost of infrastructure to actually do that. How do you think the nation's current political climate affect future tribal efforts on protecting their tribal water resources? I think that's something that, you know, we always have to be vigilant of, and I think that when this new administration came in, you know, there was like gloom and doom. You know, the sky's going to fall because we have this new president, and we were at the Parnership. We're like, well, okay, well, how can we turn this around and look at this as an opportunity? You know, what is it that this administration is important to, and how is it that we can align our priorities and our agenda to what theirs is? And so, rather than looking at it from a contentious kind of a relationship instantaneously because of who's there and what party he represents, it was like, well, no, let's look at it as an opportunity. Because if we're truly sovereigns, then why are we supporting one or the other party? I mean, that's my opinion again. But you know, if we want to act like sovereigns, then this is somebody else's political system. And so why is it that, you know, that we feel the need to engage in one side or the other? Which side is going to help us most? And so I think as it goes on, the politics absolutely plays a huge role. And how is it, again, that we get into that political arena, given the fact, again, like in the Colorado River Basin situation, we're less than 1% of the population. It's not, I mean, it's not going to happen voter-wise, so you have to build advocacy. How can tribal colleges and tribal universities be effective partners in supporting the 10 Tribes mission? I think absolutely, you know, growing, you know, the mindset, or I mean the mind value of our native youth is, and of adults too, is incredibly important. And so I think that, you know, tribal colleges and tribal universities, you know, given that they are those, you know, are tribal affiliations, you know, absolutely I think could be even more grounded in the 10 Tribes mission. And when we're looking at outreach, definitely something that I'm going to recommend that we do. Can you quickly discuss how tribal senior water rights have been continually adjudicated? With each settlement, if you guys don't know, like our settlement, for instance, it had to have provisions of buy-in from the state of New Mexico. And so we've gone through two separate adjudications, the Rio Chama adjudication and the San Juan adjudication. And those, you know, the San Juan is still ongoing at this point in time because it continues to be challenged. The Rio Grande adjudication, as it pertained to our tribe, you know, was fairly straightforward because we didn't have as much water in that particular system. But again, it's an education process because the state's always going to say that tribal water is part of their apportionment, and it's not. Is the Hopi tribe involved in the partnership? They're one of the tribes that we absolutely have on our list with my Water and Tribes project to do some outreach on. Just haven't had the chance to do it yet. And I think they, you know, from what I've heard and what I've seen, you know, they play a valuable role in this process. So absolutely, they're on the list of those that need to be part of this conversation. How are you sharing your experience with other tribes in the basin? It's, you know, I've done it in a few different ways. One is through the partnership and through conferences like this, and then also with different kinds of just conversations in terms of people that I've met over the last 8 years. And so that's part of the whole kind of strategy of next steps of the tribal water study. How is it that we get the messaging across the broader world? How is it that we start to create the listening of non-tribal world about tribal issues? Does the 10 Tribes Partnership engage college students through research, internships, scholarships, in an informal way to help answer your pressing questions? Not at this time. And like I said, right now, 10 Tribes is an ad hoc partnership, and we have a set of bylaws, but we've come to a point where we see with the conclusion of the tribal water study that we absolutely have to build capacity. And what does that mean? How do we build that capacity internally? And so we're looking at maybe an executive director or something to that effect, who would actually be the face of the organization and who would actually go out and talk about the 10 Tribes Partnership. But we haven't set up any kind of internships or scholarships yet. Has each tribe of the Colorado River watershed developed their own water quality standards for each reach within their exterior boundaries? I'm not real clear about that question. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great, sure. He's wondering about the impact of water quality. For instance, if it's coming from upstream and downstream through a reservation, and the water quality, I think is what you're saying, it has been compromised. It's been violated, yes. And so how is it that we do? We're not at that stage yet, but absolutely it's important as well. You know, I think, you know, my particular tribe has adopted water quality standards, and we're such in a remote area that I think there's a couple ranches above us, you know, so we might get some, you know, cattle or wildlife urine in our water, but that's about it. So, but definitely that's something that we want to address at some point in terms of, you know, how is it that you keep the river healthy in terms of water quality and all the effluent, all those kind of issues that are going on. What are the biggest challenges with your own tribe in managing water on your reservation? I've talked to, I think one of the biggest challenges, again, is a lack of understanding of our tribal water rights and how they work, and the realities of building water infrastructure. And I think that, you know, we were part of this ongoing drought, and this past summer we've been dealing with issues of dropping water tables, and so windmills, livestock wells, not having enough water to produce what they need. And then really looking at our rainwater source. The Navajo River used to flow about 100 CFS before they built the diversion to the Rio Grande Basin. Now it flows on an average maybe about 30 CFS. And this past summer, it was going down a CFS a day because of the lack of precipitation. So one of our main challenges, we only have one water plant, and that serves 4,000 people. And so on our reservation, one of the biggest concerns is, again, infrastructure. How do we build backup systems? How is it that we build redundancy so that in the event that there's something catastrophic happens to the river, you know, the tribe isn't just left with some potential health hazard of the system completely collapsing? Has the partnership had to deal with upstream, downstream tribes fighting over water and how it is dealt with when there's very limited water available? Whoever asked that question, we're talking fighting between the tribes themselves? Okay. Not a whole lot. Inside the partnership, there hasn't been a whole lot of dissension. We have dealt with some really tough issues in terms of one of the tribes wanting us to advocate on their behalf on a specific issue that they had. And we dealt with it for almost 6 months because we really wanted to support this tribe, but we couldn't support their specific initiative because we didn't have enough knowledge about what they were wanting to do, and so they were really upset. And so what we did is we had a tribal leadership summit with the Upper Basin tribes to discuss and just put it on the table and to speak really frankly about our concerns and not, kind of, tippy-toe around the issue that we had with them. And in the end, we were able to compromise on an issue that they wanted forwarded. And I think that's the way that it should work. You sit down, you iron out exactly what it is that you need. At first, it looked like they were going to just take all their toys and leave the room because they didn't want to participate anymore, but they did. What about forming a corporation to represent Indian water rights? That's some of the things that we're looking at in the partnership into the future, where we're looking at maybe the creation of as we forward our ability to develop our water, maybe doing a water co-op in the Southwest, where we would be able to use the 10 tribes partnership in terms of that unused water to determine exactly where it goes to, and then actually from those particular revenues start to look at restoration projects, but more importantly, one of the things that we look at too, at a very minimum of that unused tribal water, we like to have that be considered for as part of it as in-stream flows, and to have that river continue to be alive and flow all the way to the Gulf. And so if we can start to create some of those mechanisms, I think it's something that we're really interested in. And so as far as a corporation, that's kind of where we're headed in terms of our building capacity. How many tribes do you think will be willing to contribute financially to an Indian water rights super PAC to influence lawmakers and public policy? They're definitely out there. We have some pretty wealthy tribes within our organization. And then we have some really revenue, short tribes also. And one of the things that we've done in our organization is that, we make up the difference if we have to, because we understand if a tribe doesn't have those monetary resources, but they're compassionate and they're committed to this process, then the organization is pitched in for their behalf. I don't know if that's unusual, but it's been pretty cool to see. And I think, something that we've been talking about is expanding this conversation to a broader organization called Water is Life, a tribal partnership, where we actually have a national tribal conversation about water. Because what is the one thing that each tribe in this country, 567 federally recognized tribes, what do they have in common? They have in common the fact that they have some water issue. And utilizing that as the basis and the platform to start to build some consensus on the broader Indian country is something that I think is very, very needed. And in terms of a super PAC, yes, how do you do that? I know that there's an Indian organization out there right now who does a lot of political donations. And specifically for water, I think that would be helpful. How can tribes be more proactive on issues regarding water while battling racism and discrimination? I think, one of the things that we're doing is that, we're articulating in a way that's where it's a reality. It's not something that's emotional. And because if you get into the emotions of having a discussion about racism and discrimination and getting into the morality of it, that instantly causes a divide. And one thing I wanted to just share about the basic law of the river and some of the policies is that they're structured to be contentious from the get-go. Colorado River Compact automatically is about protect and defend your asset. It's not about how we can actually work on common solutions. And so does that exist? Yes. And does discrimination exist? Yes. And so how do we address that? We acknowledge it, and we know that it exists, and so we better be prepared in terms of the capacity that we operate from. And I think that's the real key, because it's always going to be there to a certain extent, in my opinion. But how do you mitigate that? Because a lot of it is just fear and ignorance. And a lot of times when you put to rest people's fear about who you are and what it is that you want, then there's the potential to actually have some solutions. Can you briefly repeat what you said about the Colorado River Compact? Is that it does not apply to tribes, but a tribe must comply with it? Yes. It's absolutely crazy. But there's a specific clause in there that says it does not apply to tribes and tribal water rights. But, you know, how is that circumvented? Within each settlement or decree, there's specific language that says that you've got to apply by it. And so we had a big issue earlier this year about wanting inclusion into the Upper Colorado River Commission. So it would acknowledge that we acknowledge the Colorado River Compact. And so why would we want to do that? But a tribe really thought it was important to be on there. And so we thought, well, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you value. That's what you value. Then that's what you value. We support you. And so I think that you know, there's a lot of these. There's the Colorado River Compact, and then and the absolute inconsistency of each settlement and decree in terms of how they are applied. And so without clarifying exactly how tribes fit into this whole system, and then not being part of original law that developed the foundation of the law of the river, then how is it that we can actually move forward? We can't. And so that's why it's so important for us to have this tribal water study, to get the messaging to the outside world, and then to make the case of why we need to be at those policy tables.
We're running a little bit late, but louder if we have time. Louder. So we're running a little bit late, but we have time later on to make it up, and it'll be fun. Because I think that any questions are important, so we have time for maybe a couple more.
Are there any questions from the audience here?
Well, just a comment. I don't need a mic. You guys can do that. So that is horrible to me that there are Navajos without water. Horrible. And I don't think the majority of the American people know that. And if you were to be able to do some sort of storytelling regarding that, and some sort of awareness campaign, that would perhaps work to your benefit.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, in closing again, you know, I really do appreciate the opportunity to have shared with you, you know, the things that I'm up to in terms of issues in the Colorado River Basin, but also, you know, how they tie in nationally. And for us, you know, some of the things that we really want to continue to work on, and I really appreciate forums like this, because, you know, at the heart of it is really how is it that we start to build tribal capacity so that we can be at a policy table and contribute and articulate what it is that we want. And so academia comes into that, and also the revolving nature of our social issues. How is it that they get tied into that, so we can actually start to move forward, you know, with having a healthy river, because it's symbolic. You know, I mean, that river's always been there, and you know, all three of the tribes that I represent all mention the significance of the Colorado River and the importance to who we are as a people. And so, you know, given that we've been here for thousands of years, and guess what, we're still here, and I think we absolutely have something incredibly valuable to offer this country, and in terms of who we are as a people. So it's been my absolute pleasure to be able to share this with you and to talk with you. And I really hope, you know, in my travels and my journey that I get to see you folks and somewhere along the way. And what a cool place this is. You guys picked a good spot. Yeah, it's beautiful here. And so thank you. Wish you well.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dorothy, I have a couple of items for you, but you have a lot of stuff to carry, so I can help carry it down here. I'll bring that down to